There's a completely different football team going to be playing in Seattle this season and in a different conference, of course. We're talking about the Huskies, and we got Lars Hansen on the line from Locked On Huskies podcast. So please join him right there, and we will give you some further details. Please like the video and subscribe here at the Voice of College Football. Lars, good to see you. How's it going?
Oh, nice cooking 95-degree day in Seattle because it always rains in the upper left. So it's always good to be on with you, Mark.
Well, we'll keep you out of the heat and the humidity and the mugginess and the rain and everything else that's going on there. We got blasted with rain just a few hours ago ourselves. So this is the one team that I have made the go-to comment a number of times during the offseason that it is got to be unprecedented that you've got a new coach, new coaching staff, this many new starters, a new quarterback, and the caveat, of course, the new conference too. So you put all that into play, and it's got to be unprecedented in the history of college football. So we got to get acquainted with this team. But I guess first and foremost is there's at least a quarterback that college football fans should be extremely familiar with because he's been prolific in the record books. And if he turns in an average Will Rogers season, he's going to figure prominently at near the top of career leadership across the board. I don't necessarily know that Jedd Fisch is too concerned about that, but start us off on the offensive side here.
Yeah, obviously losing Michael Penix, the question is who's going to, be delivering the passes. And I think the caveat for Washington, having an experienced quarterback does kind of change the trajectory a little bit because the other two quarterbacks, Shaker Kendall, a redshirt freshman from Northern Colorado, and Damon Williams, a four-star true freshman. If either of those two other guys are your option, you're looking at a 4, 5, 6-win season at best. With Will Rogers, there's a little bit of veteran. There's not a little bit. There's certainly a significant amount of veteran presence there. The question for me is going to become who's going to protect Will, who's going to open the running lanes, because you can have a very good, experienced seasoned quarterback in Will Rogers, who obviously set the SEC record for passing yards and all that is for Mississippi State. But if you don't have an offensive line or even some semblance of an offensive line, and to be clear, obviously Washington did win the Joe Moore Award last season for the nation's best offensive line. 3 of those guys are in the NFL, and 2 of them are now with Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss. So there's going to be a significant, you talked about the unprecedented alone on the offensive side. Losing your entire starting offensive line. There are only a couple of guys returning to the team from the offensive line, and one's guard Memolar, a left guard, who tore his ACL during fall camp last year, was expected to be a contributor last fall along the offensive line, probably as a backup, but would certainly have seen some game time last season. The other one is Landon Hatchett, who did play last season and then suffered a similar injury in the lead up to the Sugar Bowl against Texas. So he's been out for the last 7 months, 6, 7, 8 months now. He didn't practice in the spring. Guard was able to practice a little bit. The rest of the offensive line, a former Maryland offensive tackle who hasn't played football in at least 18 months, a center from Portland State who, albeit has had a significant amount of experience, is coming up from the FCS level. So there's, to be proven there, especially at the Big Ten level. And Nook from My High from Ohio State comes over. Heard mixed reviews on his time in Columbus. I know obviously he did get a chance to start, I believe, 1 or 2 games maybe, but certainly in his 4 or 5 seasons in Columbus didn't necessarily vault himself into being a starter for the Buckeyes. So there's a little bit of question there. The most proven offensive lineman is Drew Azzopardi, a right tackle from San Diego State. But when 4 of your 5 offensive linemen are question marks, and just respectfully to the players and the coaches going in, there's a lot left to be proven between now and even when we kick off at the end of August against Weber State.
Now, there were certainly thoughts and hopes by Husky fans that Jedd Fisch would bring some of the best talent with him from Arizona. That didn't necessarily come to fruition, although Jonah Coleman, one of the best backs in the Pac-12, did make that decision.
Yes, he did. I do think, obviously, no doubt you would love to have Noah Fafita and Tetairoa McMillan, the receiver quarterback combination. But when you have Will Rogers, you can kind of work around that. The one thing that Washington didn't have a lot of was a stable, didn't really have anything at was running back. So bringing in Jonah Coleman, who had over 800 yards and a few touchdowns in Arizona last season, working with a couple of different backs, he is no doubt going to be the lead back at Washington. I talked to a number of recruits who have taken visits and even transfer commits who have come onto the program in the last couple of months. Everybody describes Jonah Coleman without his name and says, "Oh, Washington star running back." He just has an aura about him. He has and when you mix him with Scotty Graham, where those two coming up from Arizona, it really seems like Scotty Graham is somebody who believes highly in Jonah Coleman. And PFF, I know, graded Jonah Coleman as, I believe, the number 1 or number 2 running back coming back in the country. So I think without question, there's something there. But the problem becomes behind Jonah Coleman, you have Cam Davis, who did have double-digit touchdowns in 2022 behind Wayne Talapapa, but had a torn ACL last season, did not play at all. And then we're talking about Sam Adams, a junior who hasn't done much after coming out of staying in Washington in 2020. Adam Muhammad, I think, could be actually a serviceable back, but he's a true freshman. Jordan Washington, another true freshman. So Jonah Coleman really is going to be the guy that's carrying the load, which to me is good and bad, because Jonah Coleman, I agree, is going to be a capable back. But especially in the Big Ten, you need 2, 3, and 4 running backs to offset. And so Jonah Coleman doesn't have to take all the pounding, because especially against teams like Michigan, Northwest, just those tougher teams that you're going to face in the Big Ten that maybe Washington and Arizona haven't been used to in the Pac-12 over the past couple of seasons. That to me is where you could get concerned, because if you lose Jonah Coleman, that running back room does not look friendly at all, at least for 2024 and 25 and 26. I like the talent there in terms of the young talent in the room, but I know Jed Fish loves to play freshmen, but if you're looking at Jordan Washington, Adam Muhammad, and half of Cam Davis, that's a lot less appealing than having Jonah Coleman, a revolt Cam Davis, and a couple of freshmen you can mix in to sprinkle and spread out the carries.
So you talk about losing Jonah Coleman and the team being in an issue with the running back room. What about if Will Rogers goes down?
So here's where I'm bullish on that, because Will Rogers did only play 6 games last season at Mississippi State. So there is precedence if he doesn't play a full season. The one thing for me with Will Rogers electing to stay at Washington after the coaching change, because he did commit to Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb in December before the national championship game, had a conversation with Jed Fish, elected to stay on and play for him at Washington because he only has 1 year left. They really like what they have in Damon Williams. And I don't want to put too high of an expectation bar on him, but I've already said on Locked On, I'm going to have a story coming out actually later today on Athlon Sports, where I would not be surprised if Damon plays more than 5 games this season. Now, in terms of starting, I don't believe it, but I would not be surprised if Washington finds a few packages for Damon, because he is a special dual threat quarterback. The amount of zip that he has as a true freshman with his vision, and he doesn't just fire it in there into double and triple coverage. He actually is almost like a redshirt freshman in that regard, where he comes in with so much experience, having played at Basha High School in Arizona, only lost, I think, 2 or 3 games over his entire starting career in Arizona at the high school ranks. So to me, Jed Fish loved what he was bringing in at Arizona. They brought him with him. They brought Damon up to Washington with the new staff. And to me, I think if Will Rogers doesn't end up starting the season, doesn't start every single game this season, while it's not the greatest scenario, I don't think there's that much of a fall off overall, because I think Damon can make it up with his legs. It won't look as pretty. But what we saw from Arizona when Jed Fish had to turn to Noah Fafita last season, it was a similar question where you have Jaden DeLora, you think he's the better veteran, but you put in this younger player and there's not much of a drop off. And I obviously want to respect Will Rogers because of the passing acumen that he has, but Damon's dual threat ability, I think, offsets a little bit of that. So I wouldn't necessarily be as concerned. But with respect to that, that's probably meaning you're losing 2 or 3 games that Will would win those for you if he were playing.
Yeah, it definitely sets up as a difficult season for Husky fans to take in after a national championship game run. And then whatever this is going to be, I would think it's a transition year. Let's get to 6 wins, get to a bowl game, make it not look too ugly, and make our entry into the Big Ten, and then set ourselves up for better things. And hopefully, and I know you in particular will be looking at especially the younger players on the team to see who's developing, who sets up as an impact guy or an all conference type of player the next year, which leads me to wide receiver, which was one of the best groups in college football last year. So they're all gone. Really serious college football fans will know about Jeremiah Hunter out of Cal. He was one of their top receivers, was their top receiver for 2 consecutive years. So he seems to be the leader of the group. What do we know about these wide receivers, top to bottom?
So you're not wrong in terms of if you ask everybody outside the state of Washington who the best receiver is coming in, they would say Jeremiah Hunter. The answer for me is Denzel Boston. Sorry, I had to get that one out of the way because actually Michael Banks called him Denzel Washington last year. But Denzel was a player who, had it not been for either Jalen McMillan or Jalen Polk last season, he's taking those reps, and I would not. They might not have the same exact numbers, but at 6'4", 209, Denzel can really high point the ball. He showed great last fall camp, last spring camp, this spring camp as well. So I think he's actually going to be the A1 receiver. Jeremiah will be the basketball target destination, if you will, in terms of the end zone target. Might have 10 plus touchdowns, but only have 40 or 50 catches. In a passing heavy offense, that might not seem like a ton, but you're really going for touchdowns and production in that respect versus the total yardage, which is where I think Denzel is going to lead the team in all 3 categories at the end of the season. I said that back in the spring, just because he has all those traits and was able to learn from those 3 guys the past 2 seasons. He would have played a lot. He would have played the last couple of seasons, in my opinion, if you didn't have those 3 great receivers at Washington.
Talking Huskies, and of course, Washington made it all the way to the national championship as Pac-12 champions last year. Much different look this year. The most egregious difference in personnel between one team and another from 23 to 24. We got Lars Hansen here to break it down. You can catch Lars' work on Locked On Huskies, also UW Fan Nation. So, Lars, when we look at the defense, again, total overhaul for the most part. What are the familiar spots, if any? And then take us on to the newcomers.
I think of the 2 sides of the ball, the defense is the one with the most question marks, because when you look at the offense, you know what Jed Fish is going to run at the college level. We've been able to see that at Arizona. The biggest question mark in college football is going to be, what does a Steve Belichick defense look like with college players? So you don't have the NFL pedigree and you don't have your dad actually, being the overarcher one and getting all the credit for it. What we've seen what we saw during spring camp was really interesting. There was a couple of players. I'll use one as an example. Isaiah Ward, he's a redshirt freshman, sophomore, whatever you want to call him classification wise, 2-year second player. It was an edge rusher at Arizona, lined up interior, at edge, and I want to say a nickel. It was like a weird, like a wide 18. It's like, the wide 9 edge rusher position times 2. It was more like a half nickel, half wide 9. I have a lot of questions in a positive right about what Steve Belichick will do this season, because there's so much unproven talent where you're looking at the defensive line is replacing all 5 starters as well. Braylon Trice is gone. Zion Tupuola-Fatui is gone. Your 3 interior highest rated guys are gone. And Tulu Gasanoa, Fatu Tuatele, and MJLA. The guys that they have brought in a similar realm, you're looking at Deshaun Lynch from Sacramento State. Zach Durfee is now going to be the edge rusher coming from University of Sioux Falls. There's a lot of guys where you're looking and saying, nobody is proven, but man, if all of these guys pop and you work with the NFL scheme that Steve Belichick is bringing, this could be a very promising defense. The only caveat there is most of these guys either haven't started or haven't even played as much. And Zach Durfee only got 2 games last season because the NCAA said you couldn't transfer twice. That's a separate issue because Durfee was actually a student in North Dakota State his first time around, so it shouldn't even have been a 2-time transfer. But that's beside the point. Look at the other guys. The only 2 proven guys coming back that actually played at Washington are Carson Bruner and Alfonso Tuputala, 2 linebackers. They bring in Ephesians Pricestock from Arizona, the other cornerback opposite Tacario Davis last season. He looked like he's going to be able to hold his own. You got a tall 6'3" cornerback there. The problem is similar with last season. You had Jabbar Muhammad on one side, he could hold his own, but you had Thaddeus Dixon, Elijah Jackson, the who's who of who in terms of, can you actually find a second cornerback that can prove to be a lockdown guy game in and game out, or if anything, just be able to start for 12 games. I like Thaddeus's physicality, but he is kind of a boom or bust guy in terms of he's either going to be all in or get beat completely. Elijah Jackson obviously showed, with winning the Sugar Bowl against out of the Mitchell, that he can perform in key moments, but we did see him get beat a couple of times last season as well. John Richardson is going to be a phenomenal coach. Reminds me a lot of a young Jimmy Lake before he got promoted and went down the rabbit hole that he went down. John Richardson's been able to develop cornerbacks pretty much everywhere he's been, from Wyoming to Washington State to now Arizona and Washington. I think they're going to be much improved in that regard. Where it comes into question again is the safeties. This Steve Belichick's defense is predicated upon the defenses, the secondary having two high safeties, so you can leave the corners on an island. You're coming in with Cam Fabiculon, who played a majority of last season but didn't start in front of Asa Turner, and one of Cam Broussard, a Sac State transfer All-American for a first team Big Sky last season. All these guys trying to level up. Will they actually be able to do that? And especially at the Big Ten level, it remains to be seen. You like the talent and the size and the projectability, all these favorite buzzwords that media people and pundits like to use, but nothing proven. And for me, I will be really curious to see how much of these guys that they brought in the spring transfer window actually end up starting, because I think Justin Harrington and Cam Broussard are going to be two of the guys that start week one against Weber State and carry on through the entire season at nickel and safety, respectively. That will solve a lot of problems if they can play up to the potential that they did. The problem was Justin Harrington has never been able to stay healthy for a full season since playing at JUCO back in 2019, 2020. Went to Oklahoma, was going to start last season until he tore his ACL, I believe, in week 2 or 3. So there's so many. You have about 5 or 6 guys on this team that could be starters coming off ACL injuries. We could talk about unprecedented. I can't think of a team that went to a national championship or even that played in a major bowl game that returned the next season banking on 5 guys with ACL injuries. Now, I'm not saying that that's the end all be all, but it just really puts into context how crazy that this season could be in a good and bad sense. You could win 8 or 9, or you could win 4. And there's a lot in between there that'll dictate, does Will Rogers start every game? That's probably 2 or 3 more wins. And now you're at 6. Does Harrington pop? Does Sebastian Valdez, a defensive lineman, pop and replace one of the starters that left? There's so many guys that are in position to do it. But the problem is, given that Steve Belichick has never called a game as a college DC, I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt based on his last name. But like everything in sports, you still got to prove it. And to me, we didn't necessarily see enough in the spring, no surprise, to say, oh, this is what Steve's going to do in the fall, or this is why I would be optimistic about Washington's defense. You give them the benefit of the doubt because they've been able to get some guys in, but I'm not necessarily ready to say this is a top 5 or even top 10 defense in the Big Ten. It could certainly prove to be that, but I don't think anybody realistically is going to say going into the season, yeah, this is a top team on either side of the ball, to be frank.
It is the mystery team of the Big Ten, the mystery team of college football. Let's put it out like that. It's the Washington Huskies. We got Lars Hansen on here from UW Fan Nation. Locked On Huskies. Catch the podcast with Lars. You see all of his information there on the banner. It seems to be a tendency of coaches in general, college football coaches in particular, Lars, that if they have a highly touted team, then they talk them down. I think they're trying to send a message through the media. Okay, you're not as good as you think you are. You got to keep working, nose to the grindstone. If they've got a bad team or a team that in this situation would be, of course, given far less expectations than the previous 2 editions, then they tend to talk them up because they want to bolster their confidence and tell them that they can do more. So taking in Jed Fish's rhetoric this offseason, where does he seem to be?
I don't want to chicken out on this answer, but really somewhere in the middle. The only guys that he has talked about have been the guys that came from Arizona or Will Rogers, the guys that you could easily say, hey, you know what? We know what Jonah Coleman's going to be. He's going to be a special back. Okay, Jed can make that comparison and knowing what he did at Arizona. You can talk about Will Rogers and everything he did at the SEC, but everything else, I mean, I remember he was on with a local radio station a couple of weeks ago, KJR in Seattle. He didn't mention really anybody along the offensive line in terms of transfers. Now, again, for full context, the station is a partner of the school. radio affiliate. So he's not going to get the most hardest hitting questions. I'm just going to be honest about that. So when I get to talk to him at Big Ten Media Day here in a couple of weeks in Indianapolis, one of the first 3 or 4 questions is going to be, okay, aside from the guys that you have talked about, who are you going to talk about a month from now when you're getting ready to set those 2 deeps? And I think to answer your question in that regard, he had let it kind of sit where he said, we're going to bring these guys in, but I'm not going to talk about them and I'm going to let them figure it out in a, kind of every coach seems to be in that CEO mold of, you know what, I'm going to kind of just be a little more hands off. Kalen DeBoer was in that same realm as well. And in that regard, I do think Jed's basically saying with that, we should be 6-6. We could be 8-4. I'm certainly not going to say that hey, this is a rebuilding year, because to answer your question directly, he has not said that. We've all said transition year. We've all said, expectations should be limited, but this fan base did still go to a national championship last season, albeit with a roster that's completely different. So the fans know, hey, you should still win. You should still get to a bowl game. You should still be in that 6 to 8 win mold. But if you don't win 10, we're not going to be surprised, especially when you look at who they were able to get in the transfer portal. They didn't go out and get a bunch of proven starters with Power 5 experience or even Big Ten experience. And the ones that did come from the Big Ten don't have experience. And that's respectfully saying that. So you can get all these guys that you want in the boat, but he hasn't gone out of his way to say, you know what, let's temper expectations, let's pump up expectations. I think he's kind of just letting it sit. And in reality, no one's talking about Washington in a positive or negative light. Everyone's asking the same questions that we're talking about here, which is, what is Washington? Who is this Washington team? Obviously, they went to the national championship last season. Are they going to be 2022, 23 TCU? Or are they going to be a team that can actually rebound and potentially win 8 or 9 games and then set yourself up for 2025 to still get back to that 10-win plateau? Because to me, with the tools that Jedd Fisch has at Washington, he should win 10 games in year 2 and year 3. Year 1, he gets the benefit of the doubt, especially with the roster turnover. But there's enough talent on this team where with the right coaching, and I think that's where Jedd has succeeded in that regard. He's brought in some great X's and O's coaches. The recruiters have also kind of been able to do their things. So there isn't a coach to me that I look at on the staff and say, oh, yeah, I'm not sold on his acumen. There's some guys that I think will be proven, and Steve Belichick is one of them. But all the pieces are there to have an okay season, and I think that's kind of where Jedd's at. He's not going out of his way to speak it up. He's not going out of his way to speak it down. The interesting thing for me is Washington, player-wise, has been completely absent on preseason awards list. Phil Steele, Lindsey, whichever one you want to look at. I haven't found a single Washington player. I know there's a couple that, Carson Bruner's made an appearance and Jonah Coleman's gotten a tip of the cap, but nobody is saying, hey, this guy could lead Washington, or these guys are going to be the ones to watch at Washington. I don't think anybody knows. And to me, if you're Washington, that's kind of where they entered the 2022 season, where there was some talent on the team, but nobody thought they were going to win 10, 11, 12, 10 games that season. Some of us did, but not everybody. Much like last season, I said Washington would go 14-1. Not a lot of people did. So I can see them going 8-4, but there's a lot still to be sorted out. And I know that's not the cleanest answer, but that's just where the program is at.
Lars Hansen, Locked On Huskies, also UW Fan Nation, break down Washington football for us. Lars, as always, appreciate you stopping by.
Always, Mark. It's always a pleasure to be on with you.